Snow falls silently over a quiet Massachusetts neighborhood. On a freezing January morning in Canton, a Boston police officer lies motionless in the front yard of a fellow officer's home. His jacket is dusted with snow. His body temperature is dropping to lethal levels. His girlfriend insists she dropped him off and drove away, unaware of any harm. Hours later, investigators present a starkly different story. That in a fit of rage, fueled by alcohol and jealousy, she reversed her heavy luxury SUV into him at 24 miles per hour, leaving him to bleed out in the blizzard. Within days, what appeared to be a straightforward drunk-driving vehicular homicide shattered into one of the most polarizing legal battles in modern American history. Missing surveillance footage, broken chains of custody, unexplained injuries that medical experts swore could not come from a car crash, a lead investigator with personal ties to the witnesses, and a small-town police ecosystem accused of orchestrating a monumental cover-up. This is not merely a story about a tragic death on a stormy night. It is a masterclass in how evidence is interpreted, how institutional bias forms, and how two entirely separate realities can be constructed from the exact same set of facts. Was Karen Reed a murderer, or was she framed? To decode what happened on Fairview Road, we must first examine the two lives that collided long before the snow began to fall. John O'Keefe was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. Known to friends and colleagues as JJ, O'Keefe was widely respected as a steady, dependable presence within the department. But his life outside the uniform was defined by extraordinary personal tragedy and responsibility. Following the devastating deaths of his sister and her husband, O'Keefe stepped forward to raise his young niece and nephew as his own. He transformed from a bachelor officer into a devoted surrogate father, balancing the chaotic shifts of law enforcement with school runs, youth sports, and domestic routines in Canton, Massachusetts. Enter Karen Reed. Reed was an accomplished professional, an adjunct professor of finance at Bentley University and a senior financial analyst at Asset Management. Sharp, articulate, and fiercely independent, Reed lived in nearby Mansfield, maintaining a structured, high-achieving life. In early 2020, Red and O'Keefe reconnected, having briefly dated years prior. As the pandemic isolated the world, their relationship deepened rapidly. Red integrated herself into O'Keefe's household, taking on an active role in the care of his niece and nephew. To outside observers, they were an attractive, successful suburban couple. But beneath the surface, behavioral researchers and trial analysts point to compounding environmental and interpersonal stressors. By late 2021, strain began to manifest. Text messages introduced into court records revealed cycles of affection interrupted by intense arguments over boundary lines, parenting roles, and mutual suspicions of infidelity. Reed had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and celiac disease, conditions that required constant physical management and amplified fatigue. Furthermore, both Red and O'Keefe engaged in social drinking environments where alcohol frequently served as a catalyst for latent arguments. In December 2021, during a trip to Aruba with friends, a misunderstanding involving another officer triggered an explosive verbal altercation between Red and O'Keefe. Though the couple reconciled, the incident highlighted an underlying fragility in their trust. Psychologically, this dynamic is critical. When investigators later examined the events of January 28, 2022, they viewed these recorded arguments through the lens of motive, a volatile relationship reaching a breaking point. The defense, however, saw something entirely different. A normal, albeit occasionally tumultuous, couple whose routine arguments were being weaponized after the fact to construct a narrative of intent. Friday, January 28, 2022. A major nor'easter is moving up the Atlantic coast. Canton is bracing for heavy snow and sub-zero wind chills. John O'Keefe and Karen Redd join a group of friends for drinks in nearby town spots. They begin at C.F. McCarthy's in downtown Canton before moving across the street to the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Bar surveillance cameras capture the group over several hours. Reed is seen drinking vodka cocktails. O'Keefe is drinking beers and shots. Also present in the pub ecosystem are prominent members of the local law enforcement community, including Brian Albert, a highly decorated Boston Police Sergeant Detective, and Brian Higgins, an agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF. Witnesses describe the mood at the table as cheerful. There are no visible arguments, no physical altercations, no raised voices. At 23:55, as closing time approaches, the group decides to move to an informal after-party at 34 Fairview Road, the home of Brian Albert and his wife, Nicole. Reed drives her heavy black 2021 Lexus LX570 SUV, with O'Keefe in the passenger seat. They follow behind a vehicle driven by Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law. At 0:24 a.m., Reed's Lexus pulls up along the curb outside 34 Fairview Road, near a flagpole on the front lawn. What happens over the next 10 minutes forms the core discrepancy of the entire case. According to prosecutors, an argument erupts inside the SUV. O'Keefe steps out of the passenger door. In a burst of rage, Redd shifts into reverse, accelerates rapidly up the incline, strikes O'Keefe with the rear passenger tail light, and speeds off into the night, leaving him unconscious on the lawn as snow blankets his body. According to the defense, Redd waited in the SUV while O'Keefe walked up the driveway toward the house. When he didn't return after several minutes, Redd, frustrated and assuming he had gone inside without her, drove back to O'Keefe's home on Meadows Avenue. O'Keefe entered 34 Fairview Road, where an altercation took place inside the house or basement, resulting in severe blunt force trauma and dog bites, after which his body was carried outside to the lawn. The digital record during these crucial minutes presents a maze of conflicting indicators. 0:27 a.m. John O'Keefe's iPhone records a movement cluster of 80 steps on Apple Health data, along with elevation changes equivalent to 3 flights of stairs. The prosecution claims this represents his movement leaving the SUV. The defense argues this represents him entering the house and descending into the basement. 0:32 a.m. Telemetry from Redd's Lexus registers a sharp reverse motion. 3 seconds of acceleration backing up 62 feet at up to 24.2 miles per hour. The defense contends this event occurred hours later when the vehicle was being loaded onto a tow truck or driven in a different context. 0:53 a.m. to 1:18 a.m. Karen Redd, now back at O'Keefe's home, leaves a series of frantic, increasingly enraged voicemails on O'Keefe's phone, screaming that she hates him and accusing him of leaving her.
John, I'm going home. I need to go home. You are using me right now. As a girl, you're a loser. Yourself. John, I'm telling you, kids. Nobody knows what the you want to her.
Are these voicemails the conscious rage of a woman who just intentionally struck her boyfriend with an SUV? Or the panicked lash out of an insecure partner who believes she was abandoned at a party?
I don't see blankets, Terry.
911, what's emergency?
Yes, I need someone to come immediately to 34 Fairview Road, Canton, Mass.
What's going on?
There's a guy unresponsive in the snow.
In the snow at 34?
He passed out, yes. 34, the Albert resident, yes. I just pulled up and found him.
At 6 a.m. on January 29th, 2022, as a blizzard rages over Canton with over a foot of fresh snow, Karen Red, Jennifer McCabe, and Carrie Roberts drive through the storm, searching for O'Keefe. Red had woken up at 4:30 a.m., realized O'Keefe had never come home, and panicked. As their vehicle passes 34 Fairview Road, Red suddenly screams. She spots a dark mound beneath the snow on the front lawn. O'Keefe is found lying on his back. His eyes are swollen shut and bruised dark purple. His face and clothing are covered in blood. Blood trails out from a severe laceration on the back of his head into the snow beneath him. His right arm exhibits dozens of parallel deep lacerations and puncture marks. First responders from the Canton Fire Department arrive within minutes. They find Red performing frantic CPR, covered in snow, hysterically screaming, "Is he dead? Could I have hit him? Did I hit him?" Those words, "Did I hit him?" became an instant focal point. Paramedics on scene later testified that Red stated flatly, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." However, Reed's defense team forcefully challenged this during trial, noting that no first responder wrote down those words in their official initial reports that morning. It was only weeks later, during formal interviews with state police, that the phrase transformed from an anxious, panicked question into a direct confession. O'Keefe was rushed to Good Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton, where he was pronounced dead at 8:08 a.m. His core body temperature was below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The preliminary cause of death, hypothermia, combined with blunt force trauma to the cranium. When the prosecution brought charges against Karen Rid, culminating in an indictment for second-degree murder, their case rested on physical, digital, and trace evidence. But as forensic experts took the stand across 2 trials, almost every single piece of evidence became a battleground of physical interpretation. The prosecution presented fragments of red polycarbonate plastic recovered from the snow at 34 Fairview Road. Forensic chemists confirmed these pieces matched the broken right rear tail light housing of Karen Reed's Lexus LX 570. Microscopic paint chips and hair matching O'Keefe's DNA were also reported on the rear bumper. The defense countered with video evidence showing Red's Lexus making contact with John O'Keefe's parked Chevrolet Traverse in his driveway at 5 a.m. on January 29th. As she backed out to look for him, they argued that her tail light was merely cracked at O'Keefe's house and was later fully shattered and planted at 34 Fairview by investigators seeking to shield the homeowners. Perhaps no forensic dispute was more striking than the injuries on John O'Keefe's right arm. O'Keefe's right arm bore parallel cluster claw marks and puncture wounds. His coat sleeve showed corresponding tears. The prosecution argued these marks were caused by plastic shards from the shattering tail light or the SUV's rear trim as O'Keefe was thrown into the brush. The defense presented independent forensic pathologists and a veterinary DNA specialist who testified that the injuries were textbook canine attacks, specifically consistent with Chloe, a German Shepherd mix owned by Brian Albert that was rehomed out of state months after the incident. The federal government launched an independent review of the crash reconstruction through ARCCA, Applied Research Associates. 2 independent PhD biomechanical engineers hired by the Department of Justice testified at trial. The injuries on John O'Keefe's body and the damage to the Lexus SUV are completely inconsistent with a vehicle collision at 24 miles per hour. The physics simply do not support a pedestrian hit and run. The digital forensics centered on a Cellebrite extraction of Jennifer McCabe's iPhone. The defense's digital forensic expert testified that database artifact parsing showed a Google search for chose long to die in cold was executed at 2:27 a.m., hours before O'Keefe's body was discovered, suggesting premeditation or advanced knowledge of his freezing condition on the lawn. The prosecution's Cellebrite expert fiercely disputed this, explaining that the 2:27 a.m. timestamp represented a background tab state artifact created when the browser was opened earlier, and that the actual search was typed by McCabe at 6:23 a.m. at Red's explicit request during the discovery panic. To understand why the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office pursued Karen Reed for second-degree murder, one must examine how prosecutors stitched dozens of circumstantial threads into a single cohesive narrative of intentional harm. The prosecution's framework rested on 3 foundational pillars: motive, mechanical execution, and post-incident consciousness of guilt. The state argued that the relationship between Red and O'Keefe had degraded beyond simple domestic friction. Prosecutors pointed to a blood alcohol content calculation estimating Reed's BAC was well over the legal limit, calculated backwards to approximately 0.13 to 0.20 at the time of the incident, arguing that heavy alcohol consumption dissolved her emotional filter. According to the state, when O'Keefe stepped out of the vehicle at 34 Fairview Road and hesitated or refused to return, Red snapped. The angry voicemail messages left between 0:53 a.m. and 1:18 a.m., where she screamed, "I hate you, you're a fucking loser," and accused him of cheating, were presented not as grief, but as raw, unfiltered malice captured in real time. To prove Red used her vehicle as a weapon, the prosecution called Trooper Joseph Paul of the Massachusetts State Police Collision Analysis and Reconstruction Section, CARS. Trooper Paul testified that data extracted from the Lexus's TechStream event data recorder mapped a clear physical sequence. At 0:32 a.m., the transmission shifted into reverse. The accelerator pedal was depressed to 75%, generating wheel spin on snow and ice. The 6,000-pound luxury SUV reached 24.2 miles per hour over a distance of 62 feet in reverse. The right rear tail light housing struck O'Keefe's head and arm, shattering the plastic casing, projecting O'Keefe onto the grass, and cracking the vehicle assembly. The state argued that the physical location of the broken polycarbonate tail light fragments, embedded deep within the snow layers, directly where O'Keefe's body was found, was irrefutable proof that her vehicle shattered at that precise spot on Fairview Road. Finally, prosecutors pointed to Red's own words in the early morning hours of January 29th. They emphasized testimony from Canton firefighters and police officers who swore Red repeatedly shouted, "I hit him! I hit him! I hit him!" before anyone knew O'Keefe had suffered fatal injuries. To the state, this was a spontaneous confession delivered before self-preservation instincts set in. If the prosecution's case was a tight line of cause and effect, the defense's counter case was the explosive indictment of the entire investigative architecture. Lead defense attorneys Alan Jackson and David Yannetti did not merely argue reasonable doubt. They presented a specific alternative reality that John O'Keefe died inside 34 Fairview Road during a violent altercation involving members of law enforcement, and that a coordinated cover-up was launched to framing an outsider, Karen Redd. The defense asserted that John O'Keefe walked up the driveway and entered 34 Fairview Road after Redd pulled up. Inside, an argument allegedly erupted involving Brian Albert, ATF agent Brian Higgins, and possibly Colin Albert, Brian Albert's nephew. The defense suggested O'Keefe was struck, fell, knocked unconscious onto a hard basement or garage floor, causing the massive laceration on the back of his skull, and was attacked by Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe. To support this, defense counsel highlighted no broken bones, no spinal trauma, and no lower body internal injuries, unprecedented for a person struck by a 3-ton vehicle at 24 miles per hour. Expert testimony from forensic pathologists matching O'Keefe's arm lacerations to animal bites rather than blunt vehicle impact. Chloe was suddenly rehomed to another state months after the incident, and the home's basement floor was completely torn up and retiled before the property was put up for sale. The pivot point of the entire trial came during the cross-examination of lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor of the Massachusetts State Police. Under grueling questioning, Proctor was forced to read aloud from his own personal text messages sent to friends, family, and fellow troopers during the initial days of the investigation. These messages sent shockwaves through the courtroom. They revealed not only vulgarity and profound misogyny, but an immediate, unyielding confirmation bias. Trooper Proctor admitted on the stand that he never stepped foot inside 34 Fairview Road on January 29th to search for blood, signs of a struggle, or interview the homeowners. The home of a decorated police officer was treated as an off-limits sanctuary, while Redd's vehicle was impounded and her life dismantled. Furthermore, defense investigators uncovered missing surveillance clips from the Canton police sally port, where Redd's Lexus was held, along with deleted call logs and destroyed cell phones belonging to Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, both of whom discarded their devices on a military base just days before a court preservation order took effect. The legal saga of Karen Reed unfolded across multiple dramatic acts in Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, Massachusetts. In April 2024, the first trial began under global media scrutiny. For 9 weeks, jurors were bombarded with technical telemetry, conflicting forensic biomechanics, and explosive cross-examinations. On July 1st, 2024, after 5 days of intense deliberation, Judge Beverly Cannon declared a mistrial due to a hung jury. In the weeks following the mistrial, an extraordinary post-trial disclosure surfaced. Multiple jurors reached out directly to the defense team, revealing that the jury had actually reached unanimous consensus to acquit Redd on count 1, second-degree murder, and count 3, leaving the scene of personal injury and death, remaining hung only on count 2, manslaughter, because the foreperson had not filled out the formal verdict slip for counts 1 and 3 before declaring an impasse. The the court recorded a blanket-hung jury across all charges. The defense argued that forcing Red to face a second trial on second-degree murder violated the Fifth Amendment's prohibition against double jeopardy. However, after appeals reached the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, judges ruled that the retrial could move forward on all counts due to procedural standards. In early 2025, the retrial commenced. This time, both sides adjusted their strategies. Prosecutors streamlined their forensic presentations, attempting to distance the case from Trooper Proctor's disgraced conduct. The defense leaned heavily into the independent Department of Justice crash experts. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a historic, nuanced verdict. Count 1, second-degree murder. Not guilty. Count 2, manslaughter while operating under the influence. Not guilty. Count 3, operating under the influence of alcohol. Guilty. Karen Red was acquitted of causing John O'Keefe's death, but convicted of driving while impaired on the night of the storm. By 2026, the reverberations of the Reed trials continue to shake the Massachusetts judicial system. Trooper Michael Proctor was formally suspended and subjected to internal disciplinary proceedings by the Massachusetts State Police, sparking sweeping statewide reviews of evidence handling and officer conduct. The family of John O'Keefe filed wrongful death suits, while Red's legal team pursued civil remedies regarding investigative misconduct. The United States Attorney's Office review into Norfolk County law enforcement practices remains one of the most significant federal interventions into local police procedures in state history. Long after the physical evidence is stored away in archives, the Karen Reed case stands as a terrifying case study in cognitive science, social psychology, and institutional preservation. How did millions of people watching the exact same trial arrive at diametrically opposed truths? In criminal psychology, confirmation bias dictates that once a human mind accepts a primary hypothesis, it selectively filters new data, amplifying information that confirms the belief while discounting evidence that contradicts it. For those who believed in Reed's guilt, every piece of broken red plastic was undeniable proof of a hit and run. Reed's frantic voicemail rants were proof of murderous rage. For those who believed in her innocence, every broken taillight fragment was evidence of police tampering. Reed's voice messages were simply the distress of a heartbroken partner. Within law enforcement circles, group dynamics often create a powerful protective instinct known as in-group loyalty. When an officer dies under ambiguous circumstances, the immediate institutional drive is to resolve the event quickly without exposing internal liabilities. When investigators viewed Brian Albert not as a potential suspect to be interrogated, but as a fellow officer to be insulated, the integrity of the investigation was compromised before it ever truly began. The Reed case was perhaps the first true crime phenomenon fully driven by real-time internet crowdsourcing. Thousands of amateur sleuths, legal bloggers, and content creators dissected court transcripts line by line, analyzing frame-by-frame Sally Port footage and tracking flight patterns of key witnesses. This democratization of investigative analysis empowered the public to expose institutional flaws that might otherwise have remained hidden in a police filing cabinet. Yet it also created digital echo chambers, where conspiracy theories flourished without evidentiary restraint. Can truth survive when an investigation becomes the controversy itself? Did the justice system work Or did this case expose something far more disturbing about our institutions, our reliance on police authority, and the fragile nature of memory? John O'Keefe was a son, a brother, a dedicated officer, and a father figure who stepped up when his family needed him most. His death on a frozen lawn in Canton remains a profound tragedy. Yet the search for ultimate clarity was buried under layers of poor police work, lost evidence, and bitter tribal division. Sometimes, justice is not determined by what happened, but by what people are willing to believe happened. And in the Karen Reed case, that distinction may forever remain impossible to separate. This wasn't just another murder investigation. It was another attempt to decode evil.